Hi, everybody. Welcome to Crossing the Firewall. I'm Dr. Tom Holt. I'm a professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at Michigan State University, and I'm also the director for the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training. And I'm here with my two excellent colleagues.
I'm Rachel McNeely. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice and an associate with the center.
Hi, and I'm Taylor Fisher. I'm a postdoc here at MSU, and I'm also an associate of the center.
So on the show, we like to bring in different people to talk about issues related to cybercrime and cybersecurity. We like to make this a really kind of cross-disciplinary discussion where we can link up academic research and policy and practice, whether we're talking about for law enforcement or industry or even just for the average person. So every time we bring in a guest, we want to be able to connect it to a real-world problem and have it lead them to talk about something that they're really passionate about or something that they're interested in. And we have a great guest with us today. It's Dr. Nate Fisk, who's an associate professor at the University of South Florida, and he's also the academic director at Cyber Florida. He's a great guy to talk to about different issues related to cybercrime and cybersecurity, particularly around cybersecurity education, which is one of those challenging areas. I know we all like to think that we are technically proficient. I know, like all of you, I wind up being tech support for my parents, which makes me seem more technically competent than I am. But it's a challenge, really, at the end of the day, right? We like to think that we have skill, but how do we really know it? What constitutes cybersecurity education in your mind?
I mean, to me, I think the intersection where human behavior comes into education for cybersecurity is so important because we've emphasized that over and over again, right? Cybersecurity can be infrastructure, but also speaking to interactions with the infrastructure. So I don't have any of my own thoughts. I'm more interested to learn what it looks like when you're trying to teach people. It's not these scary systems. It's not these highly technical things you have to implement. And similar to you, I'm not all that technical myself. I always say the most technical thing I've done recently is install mods for Stardew Valley on my computer. So
Yeah, I said that's an accomplishment. Yeah, I think when I think of education particularly, I think of what I don't know and how I don't know what I don't know. And that, I think, is really hard for cybersecurity and just cyber hygiene generally, because I don't know what's out there. I don't know what I'm going to be faced with. I don't know what my email phishing is going to look like in the next week. And so trying to keep up with it as somebody in the field is hard enough. But then, I think about parents with kids, trying to teach my kids, don't click on these things. I know they look fun. I know you're going to win some Roblox money, but that's not how this works. And so being able to come to the table with information that's helpful and practical exercises that can help people is hard enough, but remembering that there's so much more down the road that's coming, that the unknown is the hardest part for me.
And when I was younger, computers were way less easy to use right out of the box. It was usually a day to sort of get it set up, figure out what you're doing. Internet speed was dial-up at best, and so we weren't talking about the same things that we are today, where you literally just pull the device out of the box and it works immediately. Maybe you push some updates, but that's it. And so it's such a different environment to work in, too, that it's not like it was. And so as a consequence, I'm not even sure my kids have any real fundamental understanding of how computers work. They might understand some real minimal basics of cybersecurity, but they don't know anything really when it comes to devices or Wi-Fi or anything else. It's just simply, hey, can you get me on the internet?
And again, kind of these pre-boxed, like we talked about Chromebooks, that kind of just have an interface, but you don't interact with anything going on in the background. And so if that's a predominant source of learning how to interact with computers, I think that could also hamper the ability to implement any more technical measures down the road. And I think of, we talk about the CSI effect in the criminal justice system. I think there's also been that effect in computers and hacking, where, in the same shows where they're like, unplug the router, and it's like, problem solved. And that's not the case.
No.
So.
Well, let's bring in our guest. I'm fascinated to hear what you think. Nate, it's great to have you on.
Glad to be here, of course. Thank you for the invitation, and always really excited to have a couple minutes to talk about cybersecurity and cybersecurity education. But yeah, I'm right on board with you all about the way that you're talking about cybersecurity education, and you brought up a lot of interesting points to start from. And in particular, this idea, like that idea of the Chromebook completely resonates with me, right? Like, just the simple fact that one of our big challenges today, and even if you're just thinking about cybersecurity education, right? And even if you don't know that much about anything technical at all, I mean, just try doing real cybersecurity education on a Chromebook. That doesn't work that way. And even more importantly, the Chromebooks often been designed, right, to resist that kind of education, because the Chromebook is designed to keep things locked down. The Chromebook is designed to keep kids in control, or more specifically, to keep teachers in control of kids while they're on the Chromebook. And even more generally, it's that kind of setup that we face almost everywhere we go in K-12, and increasingly even into undergraduate years, where students don't have that much real hands-on experience having their hands in the guts of the machine. And that's something that's becoming an increasing problem as we talk about cybersecurity education, and something I honestly face every single day, which is, it used to be pretty normal that everybody basically understands how a file system works. But now with kids, growing up on phones and Chromebooks, that's not always even the case. So it's not even, you're not even sure if you're working on the same metaphors, if the same concepts are the same for a lot of these students. And you kind of have to start all the way from zero, just to get students up to the level that they need to be to talk about cybersecurity education.
I think that's really interesting, because I never really considered the fact that we use so many analog metaphors in computers, right? Like a file system comes from a file system, right? Like files in drawers and all that. And these kids are growing up, they've never seen a filing cabinet. They don't even know that that's a concept. So that's...
Yeah, like, why is the symbol for a folder look like that?
Yeah,
I've never
exactly.
seen a manila folder.
So how did you wind up studying this particular issue? What got you interested in cybersecurity education?
I'm an interdisciplinary weirdo that had some interesting historical timing. So the way I like to tell people who I am is I'm an IT and cybersecurity guy turned social scientist. And the way that happened was I was one of those, I'm about your age, Tom. I was one of those kids, growing up on dial-up, riding my bike to see Hackers in the movie theater for the 4th time. I wanted to be that guy, right? Like I was that. And I, moving up into, through high school and getting up into college, everyone was like, oh yeah, man, like you're never going to even finish your college degree. You're going to go straight into industry. You're going to have a 6-figure salary. You're going to have to struggle to even finish. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. That's all I ever want to do. No more school. That would be fantastic. I hate school. So then I got, doing my undergraduate degree in IT and cyber, and things get looking more and more bleak as we enter into the .com bust. And so that was my job prospects, kind of starting out, was nothing, because all the tech jobs were dead. So it was kind of, well, let's hang around academia for a little bit longer, and let's see what kinds of research we can get involved in. And as it turned out, I was in the middle of a class that I had to take, a deeply, deeply angry that I had to take, by the way, a class called cybercrime. And I was mad that I had to take cybercrime because the university was using cybercrime as an effective gatekeeper to the big, fancy technical classes that you could get in some real trouble with, basically so that they could say, oh, yeah, you took cybercrime, so you know what trouble you were going to get into if you broke these things. And that made me real mad. I was plenty responsible. But in this class, I rapidly found out that, oh, the people are just as interesting as the machines are, if not maybe more interesting than the machines are. And so from there, I ended up getting a position at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, doing basically internet safety and cybersecurity communications in their office of security. And so I was teaching faculty and students basic hygiene, and one thing led to another. I ended up in a degree program called Science and Technology Studies, which is kind of like, if you know Jane Goodall by any chance, Gorillas in the Mist. Instead of Gorillas in the Mist, We like to look at engineers and scientists in the mist and go, oh, that looks like culture that you're doing over there. Is that culture that you're doing over there? And they get mad. Oh, no, that's not culture. It's very serious and unbiased science that we're doing over here. Don't look. And then I'd say, I think that's actually culture, you guys. And then they kind of shuffle you out of the room and you get to do something else. But doing that kind of work and working inside of schools, talking about internet safety at first, and really focusing in on, how are kids experiencing these kinds of cybercrime problems? What was it that kids were doing online that was so risky and so problematic? How was it that we were addressing these problems, if we were at all? And so that kind of led me into a position that was much more explicitly about cybersecurity education in a college of education. And so now primarily what I work on is thinking very carefully about how it is that we make more hackers effectively. Not thinking just about, crime and how it is that we address that, how we communicate kinds of risks, but much more about how it is that we think about how we cultivate the kinds of people that can do this work, that can defend, that have that adversarial mindset. And that really is where a lot of the challenges come into play, is cultivating that one last bit which says, oh yeah, like I see a red button in this room and I can hit that red button and I know it. Rather than, I'm afraid of that red button and I don't think I want to hit it. And that is one of the hardest things to cultivate inside of human beings that we really focus on in cyber ed today.
So obviously, I've worked with you in the 502 project before.
Yeah.
I've been in the 502 Discord for many years now. So I'd like to, if you don't mind, just speak to that project a little bit, because I think it ties in a lot of the ideas that you were just mentioning of bringing the right people to the right room and having, all these different discussions with, from my experience, different people in different positions and different ideas that I may not have considered as a possibility for a career, but it's really advantageous for these young scholars, maybe early cyber people.
Absolutely. So we mentioned the 502 project very briefly here, and that is my big federally funded project that kind of starts with one core challenge, and that's this. And it's the core idea that cybersecurity education is not simply about formal education. It's not about just the things that you learn in books. It's not about just the things that you learn in the classroom. And it's certainly not just about the things that you learn to take a test or get a certificate. And so as a result, as somebody that does cyber ed, going around to conferences and stuff like that, I would get loads of students walking up to me and basically saying, yeah, Fisk, I had my associate's degree in criminal justice and I really had trouble finding a job after that. And everybody said, go get into cybersecurity. That's the place to be right now. We need so much talent there and your skills would be a good fit. And they go, oh yeah, so I did that. I got my degree in cybersecurity, a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and now I can't even get an interview. What's going on? And so my answer to that was, well, what are you doing that's connected to the community? What are you doing that's connected to the culture, right? And the answer I would get back was, well, what culture? What community? Who are these people, right? And the answer is, well, it's all of these people who are at the conferences, at DEF CON. It's the people who are doing the competitions, the capture the flags, the community-grounded stuff, right? The hanging around with other hackers and people who do fun technical things just for fun, right? And it's those people that manage to hang in the interview. And that seems relatively straightforward, right? It's not just what you're learning formally that makes you as the professional that people are looking for. It's also your ability to be part of a community, to have a particular cultural outlook, to have an understanding about how things work in practice, even beyond the things that you've learned in a classroom setting. And as it turns out, the kind of informal mechanisms that we all use to judge whether or not somebody's legitimate are the same ones that cybersecurity communities and hackers use to talk with their own folks, right? And so when you end up inside of one of these interviews, the questions that you're going to get are going to be, what are you building inside of your home lab? What's the cool stuff that you're playing around with? What's the last competition you ran, and what are the challenges that you faced as a part of it? What's the last conference that you went to or big event that the community's at? And these folks would kind of come out of here being like, but I got the degree, right? I didn't know I had to do all this other stuff too. So the 502 project was really built as a response to a lot of those challenges to say, hey, we don't just need to expand access to the actual education of cybersecurity. We need to expand access to the culture and the community of cybersecurity just as much. And if we fail to do that, then we end up bottlenecking the talent pipeline that we're working so hard to build. And honestly, then we end up putting roadblocks in place to people who otherwise really want to be a part of this thing, to do the work of, the tremendous effort of securing like our nation's infrastructure or global infrastructure. And so we built this 502 project space that's meant to be this genuinely accessible and participatory access to the cybersecurity community. And I can talk more about that, but I'll pause there just for a second.
No, I think that's great. And it's so interesting thinking about the role of culture and pro-social involvement in that way. And especially, right, you use the word hackers, and I think that's inherently negative to a lot of people. They think of illicit hacking, and that's not always the case. And we know from other research, right, that illicit hackers do have these social networks. They're not loners typically. And so kind of looking at that in the inverse of pro-social networks and using that to your advantage for kind of, white hat hacking and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up too, because I throw around hacking all the time, right? For me, it is 0% negative. I don't feel those connotations in the way that I talk, and I don't feel those connotations with the people that I work with for the most part, right? And importantly, a lot of the work that I do is grounded in that history that points back to, what was going on in the 1950s and the 1960s and the 1970s back on, the MIT campus, right? Which is really where we get these ideas of hackers and hacking in the first place. And that importantly, if you look back at history, right, one of the first things that you find about the culture and community of hacking as it was back then. And I want to make sure that we're not putting like rose-colored glasses on and saying, oh yeah, it's all just these MIT cool hackers, right? Like that's all this is. Like that's not what I'm saying, right? But it doesn't mean that there's not roots back there, that we can't point back there and find some family resemblance to what's happening today. And that if we're talking about cybersecurity and education in the same breath, you kind of have to look at hackers and hacking back on the MIT campus and why they were doing what they were doing. And like to keep it real short, because this is an easy like 45-minute like exciting thing to talk about.
We love soapboxes around here. Though. We
do.
do.
This is one of my biggest soapboxes. So I'll just put a toe on the soapbox for a second, and I will say, well, look, like those kids, right? Those undergraduate students at MIT who were being hackers, right? Hacking wasn't really about like breaking stuff. It was really much more about procrastination. It was much more about like being a student that felt the pressures of this like top tier research university in engineering and saying, oh no, I know stuff. You can fail me out of this university all you want, but I know how to do these really cool and technically skilled things. I'm just not going to do the one that you want me to do.
Yeah.
I'm just
Almost
not going to do it in the
subversive.
way that you expect, right? And that resistance to formal education, right, is part of the way that we think about knowledge in the field even today. That it's not just about what you learn in a book or a manual, and in fact, most people that do this for real will have you throw those things away in day one, right? Because it's about, again, that hacker ethic, right? Having your hands in the guts of the machine above anything else, right? And that is often something that has to be done with other people. And that learning from this perspective is not a solitary pursuit, right? It's about a network. It's about the people you know, the people you work with, the people you hang with, and the things you do every day, right? And that's why cybersecurity education is so hard to engineer as if it was just a degree program or a cert, because that's definitely not all it is, right?
So tell us more about how the community plays into this. Tell us more about 502 and what you do and how we can understand it more from that community level.
Sure. So the 502 project is really just an effort to kind of, again, open up the gateways to that. And what we did at first was go out to other universities, other people doing cybersecurity education. And as it turns out, you really don't have to go far to find somebody doing this kind of thing. You can throw a rock and hit somebody doing a camp program or a boot camp or working with high school kids or anything, right? This stuff is all over the place because there's a lot of money behind it because it's really urgent, right? So the 502 project was meant to, rather than kind of coming in and saying, oh, let's, we're going to do it right this time, and we're going to tell you all how to do it, which is honestly the way a lot of these things tend to go most of the time. Instead, we wanted to say, no, like, let's find the best of what our communities have to offer. If you're just doing a thing, even if it's not the best thing, if you're just going out to a school district and you're a faculty member or you're an industry professional, or if you're somebody from government, and let's say you found 12 high school kids to give a presentation to, what's to say you don't turn on your webcam and broadcast that out to a giant Discord of 1,000 people, right? There are other educators and other students and other adults trying to become cybersecurity professionals and other people who want to know how to do this engagement thing, who all have shared needs and interests, but they might come at it from a slightly different perspective. So why not make these things into giant community convening events, right? And why not share everything from basic level, oh yeah, like I'm an undergraduate student and I'm going to be studying today. You want to come along with me? Let's turn on the web camera and do that. All the way up to, oh, we're at DEF CON today and we're going to show you what's going on inside of DEF CON and all of these real like industry and government professionals. So through that, we try to build these regional communities as part of the 502 project, often centered around universities where other people like us are doing that kind of work. And as we've done that, kind of building our community out, again, a giant federally funded Discord full of all of the kind of security supports you would need to hang around hackers and cybersecurity professionals, a bunch of events and exercises that we run, all free of charge. But as we started doing this, we realized that we were actually convening some really interesting groups of people together. So law enforcement and local CISOs, industry folks, educators and researchers, students. And as we started pulling all these folks together, we started asking the question, well, if we care about real community-grounded mechanisms for doing cybersecurity education, and we're trying to build these talent pipelines as quickly as we can, why not just take these groups of people and start asking the question, what would it take to take these students over here and get them on an effective like ride-along with these security professionals over here, right? And so we've started now to build these regional experiential kinds of exercises where we take, just here in Tampa, for example, we're building small working groups all over the place, but we've taken a group of folks from here in Tampa. We've taken our local electrical company and water company. We've said, all right, look, you're busy right now trying to secure facilities. What if we took a bunch of students and had them use some open source data and just give you back a report? Let's see what we can do just with that. And slowly we've been building up. We're going to have our second engagement, which we hope is going to involve some folks up in New York, ideally also some representatives from the FBI. But we're looking to build more of these experiences with working groups across the U.S. And they're getting bigger and bigger. And again, we're trying to now take the community that we've built and then leverage that community to really build talent in a much bigger way. But again, all of this is really centered on the idea that the kinds of education that we need to do are not just about individuals, they're about communities. And they're about educating everyone together to allow people with different stakeholders and different kinds of people to find within a community the kinds of things they need, whether that's talent or information or resources or access to opportunities. By centralizing a community, we can do that together.
That's awesome. And it touches on one of my personal soapboxes, that cyber is much more grounded in the physical world
Yes.
than I think is inherent to how people think about it, right? As long as we are human, physical beings interacting with a piece of technology, it is rooted in the physical world. And that's where physical communities come in, like what you guys are doing.
100%. And just to, again, to speak to Tom's kind of intro piece where he's like, yeah, I was on dial-up and, you know, that was the 90s, right? For me, same thing, right? I remember being that kid and like, but that's ended up being a real big part of the way that I've had to do my research and my thinking in this space, is that you have to, as any researcher in this space kind of has to wrangle with, you realize that maybe we didn't need to make that move, right? Back in the 90s. In the 90s, it seemed like there was cyberspace and meat space, right? That those two things were the real world, right? Those were different things, and they were not the same. And so it made sense to call it cybersecurity. It made sense to call it internet safety. It made sense to make those things separate and deal with them differently. But as it's turned out, that's not really the reality of living and working with these technologies. It's much more about a kind of layering. And even as we're talking about that, one of the things that we're doing in a big way is we're finding that it's that mindset that's almost continuous with physical security. And if you talk to real security professionals, I mean, just go to DEF CON. I mean, you're going to find people working on highly physical activities and highly physical penetration testing, because that's just part of the way that real security professionals think, right? It's not like, and again, that's part of this community apparatus. It's not enough to say, oh, that's not on a computer, not my job, right? I'm out. Oh, I can't get in now. It's behind a locked door, and I don't know what to do, right? No, that's not how security professionals think. They just see the locked door as one more challenge, and if you are in a community of people and you don't know how to open a locked door, it means you do have someone to call, right? Mm-hmm. And understanding that level of expertise is not simply about what you know as an individual, but about the network of people that you can draw on at any given moment is tremendously important. And again, that makes sense for any security professional in the field, but is a little bit harder to grasp for people who are just reading and kind of doing this skills-based approach to thinking how it is that you become a security professional.
So quick anecdote on that, because one of the events that we worked at USF was summer camp, right? And so we got to do a fun activity on network forensics and digital forensics. But I think what really stuck with me and kind of spoke to this conversation is the students were talking to us about their other challenges that they were doing. And everyone was so excited because this one penetration testing challenge was like a huge thing and everyone was stuck on it. And the one person that like solved it, or whoever got to it, just opened an unlocked door. That was it. Yep. Right? Yep. It was so simple that this student was like, yeah, nobody thought about it. So I just kind of walked around the building and opened a door and it was unlocked, and then I got the challenge. And like you were saying, like, you never think outside of computers when you're in that mindset. You're stuck, this is my computer, this is my network. But that student was just so maybe green to cyber, right? To say, well, maybe I just need to open a door, right? And I think that's where kids and cyber education is so much fun, because they think about things the way we don't.
Absolutely, but that's half the, like, the problem is with kids especially, and I'll just say this too, like, cyber camp is one of the biggest things that I do. It is my favorite thing that I do. A lot of the ideas for the 502 project came out of cyber camp, and so we are unsure I'll share this on the podcast very confidentially. We are unsure if this is the 10th year of Cyber Camp or not. Okay. It depends on how you count. So this year this year is Cyber Camp X. Next year is Cyber Camp 10. Okay. And we're just going to celebrate for 2 years, and it's going to be great. But
I love that.
But Cyber Camp is, right, like, the problem with these kids is that you have to literally get them to stop thinking about school, right? You can't think in terms of school or you're doing it wrong. You have to get them thinking in that, like, high chaos, like, kid teenager mentality, like, how are you going to break this thing? How are you going to ruin this entire event? And as soon as they're thinking like, oh, like, I'm not standing around here listening to a PowerPoint slide deck, because we're highly anti-PowerPoint inside of our summer camp program. Sorry, Microsoft, we know you also bring volunteers. It's not to say anything about Microsoft specifically, but no slide decks is really a big rule. And we encourage students and kids to take things off the rails as hard as they can. I like to joke that there's two Fisks of cyber camp. There's Julian, who is my experienced educator. Years as a high school educator in Tampa, just a straight shot, like, solid educator that knows how to move kids around. He keeps me in check while I constantly try to take things off the rails and push it to the limit. Insofar as it has to be about getting those kids talking to cybersecurity professionals. And so that camp program looks like that. It's just meant to be chaos. The activities don't matter. What matters the most, right, is that you got one student, every student in that place, to talk to at least one cybersecurity professional. That they can go home after that program and go, yeah, I learned this kind of cool thing, but I barely know how it worked. But the important thing is, I met this guy from Cisco today. And I know today that if I have questions about what to do next, I can go ask. I can find out what to do. I know who to talk to about this stuff, right? And often that's the stumbling point and the challenge, is finding somebody that students can talk with in a way that feels authentic and not constrained and not formal, right? And all this formality gets in the way of what's often a kind of natural inclination to break stuff and be ridiculous that serves that hacking mentality, right? Like, we teach students that that's what we need more than we often need the, why, yes, Dr. Fisk, and today we will be discussing how it is not to get phished in our emails. Like, that's not it. Like, that's no fun. That's boring. Nobody wants that, especially not these kids, right? Yeah. They're just sitting there looking at you with these dead eyes. Like, that's not cybersecurity education. That's somebody doing something for some metrics to make themselves look and sound good. And that's not what I want to do. And if you're doing that, just stop. Bring me your money instead. I'll make something cool for you, and you can do that. Trust me, it'll be way more interesting for everyone involved.
Can I ask the boring question then?
Please.
How do you know that what you're doing works? Like, how do you assess the effectiveness of the education program? 100%.
And I will say, so on one hand, I'll again, open book here. I don't care. I don't care. And I say that very loudly because the important thing for me is community growth. I'm not actually that interested. I say this all day long with the 502 project. I'm not actually an education scholar. This makes USF real happy too. When I say, like, oh, you hired me inside of this, like, whole college of education, but I'm not an education scholar. That's not actually what I do. I'm, by nature of who I am and what I do, I know epistemology really well. I know how we know things about things really well. I know that stuff, and I can kind of back my way into education, but I don't actually care about educating people. What I care about is building a strong community. And that for me, a convenient after effect of building a strong community is sometimes educational outcomes. But that I'm going to leave it mostly to everybody else to deal with the metrics and the assessments and those kinds of things, because I don't actually think that's needed as much as we need to be able to communicate these basic ideas. And more importantly, that what I'm really trying to do is build a community where everyone can go and get that much of the adversarial mindset. That's my goal, right? Is to give everyone a little bit of adversarial mindset. And so as to whether or not, right, I'm leading into these formal outcomes and educational success, those are things that I do primarily when it comes to funding. Those are things that I do primarily when it comes to talking about promotion and tenure. And I will be open about those things. Like, that's the way that we have to talk at those moments. But for the most part, I care about the community. I care about the way that my students talk. I care about the way that they have interactions with security professionals. I care about the ways that they solve challenges. So by way of example, and again, to show you exactly how much I care about the formality of it all, you can do challenges inside of the 502 project, CTF Jeopardy style challenges. And for those of you on this podcast who don't know what that is, if you've ever seen Jeopardy, it's just a kind of a quick question. You answer the question in the form of a question, not in the CTF, but neither here nor there. The idea is that these challenges are just a little thing to get you to learn, like a puzzle box, right? We took those challenges, we take dead challenges from competitions, we take challenges that our community builds, we take challenges that we've built ourselves. And if you are working on one of those challenges, the idea is that you have to ask for help. When you ask for help in the system, it goes and finds people with a job role that's associated with that challenge and tries to connect you. It goes to try to find students that have already completed that challenge and tries to connect you. And then it tries to find the people that made the challenge and tries to connect you. Because the challenge isn't about completing the challenge or even knowing anything about the challenge. The challenge is about an excuse to get you to connect with somebody else, to have a conversation. And if there's any one thing that I know about what I've spoken with other security professionals when they're in that interview room that they're having the biggest struggle with, it's just simply put that they can't find people that have that quote unquote passion, right? They can't find people that have that drive to keep learning, right? And that's how they talk about this stuff. Again, it's not as easily pinned down as that. And I resist kind of in that way those formal metrics and thinking about how it is that people know anything about anything. Because if it was just about those tests and just about those metrics, we wouldn't be having a talent crisis in the middle of all of these certificates and degree programs. And I wouldn't be able to walk onto CyberSeek and go, oh, look, there's over 100,000 open positions in cybersecurity today. And so I'll weasel out of that just a little bit and leave it there.
I would say I can move the train to a different path if you'd like.
No,
but
I'm happy to confront my lack of interest in quantitative metrics.
That's fantastic. So one thing I will say is I've never seen a better built Discord page than the 502 project. It is so well built, and obviously you and your team have taken a lot of time to think about it and think about how it can be used as a tool for anybody, right? No matter your role in it. And so I'd like to ask you to speak less so about educating people about the tech, but the role that tech plays in the education. I think one thing we've discussed in other places is children are learning computers just by screen time, right? You give your kid an iPad, they're going to learn how to put in a passcode and learn what they need to do. But how do you see technology playing a role in the education generally? And as an educator, how can I be better about integrating that tech in meaningful ways?
Yeah, no, you've hit another place that's very close to home for me, and specifically, so again, I come out of a degree program called Science and Technology Studies. If you're listening to this and you haven't heard of that, go take a look. It's kind of interesting. I found it interesting enough to continue on through an entire doctoral program. But a big part of that, right? And again, people may be standing around, well, what are you doing talking about education, Fisk, if you're not an education scholar? I talk about technology. Right? And I talk about technology from a critical perspective, and what that means more specifically is that I see technology as architecture, as the kind of our lived environment and ecology, right? And I teach a class called Digital Media in Learning, and that entire class is meant to aggressively take graduate students, making them confront these baked-in notions about what they know about technology and education, and then excise them. And more specifically, I like to say things that are like, well, just because you got an A in something doesn't mean you actually know anything. It just means you got an A. It means you satisfied the requirements for that course. It doesn't mean you know anything about anything at all. And so in this class, I'm very careful about what technologies that I adopt, because the pedagogy, right? How you teach matters quite simply as much as what you're teaching. And very specifically, as we are trying to teach kids, right, and even undergraduates and adults about what technology is, if you watch what's going on, things are getting more locked down, not less locked down. The things that you need to kind of have your hands on the machine to really understand it are becoming harder and harder to come by. And I hear the arguments of, oh, but wait, Fisk, you don't need to know how to code. Everybody doesn't need to know how to do that. I agree, right? I don't disagree with that. But where I do have issues are that those are becoming harder to access, that coding is becoming more difficult, that it's becoming replaced with ideas about technology that allow very specific interests to get in and lock it down. And as we lock down those technologies, they become assumptions that our students then kind of live on. And if we can't unpack those assumptions, right, that's literally the adversarial mindset. If we're not teaching students in the kind of security fields that know these are not machines to be blindly used, these are things that you need to break, that you need to look at and say, I want to know what's going on under the hood. And if I don't know what's going on under the hood, I don't want to play with this, right? That is the adversarial mindset. And for all educators, because I teach this in a class for instructional technology, I tell people all the time, if you are making a choice about an instructional technology to integrate into your classroom, and you haven't bothered to understand the underpinnings of what people mean by education in the first place, then you're running a car and you don't know what engine is under the hood, right? You have no idea. And even, like, I'll take Canvas, for example, right? Very quickly. Take Canvas, for example. I run a class that is very highly community-based and social. I all but don't care that there are individuals in my class. And if I could, I would say none of you are passing until all of you have passed. I would do that because I think education is a social process. I think education is not a thing you do by yourself. And if that's serious, then the grade shouldn't be that way, right? You can't do that in Canvas. No matter what you do in Canvas, there will always be a column that says final score, numerical value. And every semester I get students running up to me going, but my numerical score says 88.9%. And I will say, I have no idea what that means. I did not put anything into the system that suggested that there were numbers here. So I'm sorry, but no, right? And again, you choosing those technologies changes the way that your students can think in the long run. And I'll just say this, and at risk of putting a Marxist anything anywhere out into the world these days, please go check out a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. If you've never heard of Paulo Freire, his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, has been more influential to me in thinking about hackers and hacking than just about anything else I've read. Specifically, this understanding that it's not just about what you're teaching, but how you do the teaching. And if you're not teaching cybersecurity professionals that they need to be at the center of how they learn things, then they're never going to do it for themselves. They're never going to have that passion. They're never going to hit that red button. They're never going to have that adversarial mindset because they're always going to wait for somebody who is an authority figure to tell them how to do it rather than just hitting that big red button for themselves. And I'll also just throw in, because I know we're short on time, speaking of books, one last book that I think everybody should read if you're in this field. It's a weird one. It's called Talking About Machines by Orr, O-R-R. And this guy was an ethnographer who studied copier repair people at Xerox PARC. And if you want to know why the copier repair people and hackers throw the manual in the trash when they're diagnosing a problem, this will tell you why. It's because they transfer stories, right? It's not about what's in the manual. It's about the people you know and the war stories you've told. That's the manual, not the manual. So go check out OR. Also, by the way, if you've ever heard of communities that practice it all, that's where that idea came from originally.
That makes sense.
So I know we focused a lot on kids, but given so much information is communicated between parents and their kids, how do we help parents in terms of cybersecurity education? What can we be doing better?
This is the biggest, this is my, white whale at this point. Talking with parents in a world that is increasingly designed to make things more difficult for them. And I say that as a parent, right? It's been a real journey being that guy who studied internet safety for, 7 odd years, and then having kids of my own and needing to deal with somehow keeping them safe out there. And the first thing that I would say is that my big concerns as a parent are less about the kind of traditional internet safety issues and much more about how, and again, I'm going to come off as really conspiracy theory here, but as I'm increasingly concerned about the ways that media companies are kind of sinking their claws into generations. A quick way I think about that is just like Cocomelon. No shame for those of you who have exposed your kids to Cocomelon, right? But I see Cocomelon and I can see a line all the way to like national security, right? And here's that quick dotted line, right? Because we only got minutes left. But like, man,
I'm interested.
Cocomelon is media that's designed for kids. It's not about good stories. It's not about positive content. It's not about things that are good. It's about motion. It's about noise. And it's about maintaining kids' attention no matter what, right? And that if we teach our kids that that's the way that we consume media, they don't think about it, they don't engage with it, they don't have an attention span, they don't have the preconditions that you need for calm, careful thinking about security and how you do things. You just react because that's what the system wants you to do. And the algorithms and the components, the YouTubes and the Googles and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, right? They build off of those capacities that you put into children with these fast-paced, high-engagement kinds of media, right? Mm-hmm. And if we're not careful about the forms, the architectures, the material, the lived realities of these technologies as parents, then we don't really understand what we're building into our kids. And more importantly, that if we don't teach kids to be careful about what they consume, then we build these nostalgia hooks into our kids that make them easy to speak back to someday. Again, I don't think Marvel is as simply just great storytelling as like everybody wants it to be, right? That's a hook that you want to put in my kids someday so that you can get their money when they're 30, right? I don't want that, right? And I'm even more worried about that in an algorithmic world where it seems easier and easier to predict what human beings are doing every single day. And so for me, I'm making my kids as weird as possible. I think of it almost, for those of you who are technical at all, I think of it as cultural fuzzing. I want my kids to be as like schizophrenic as possible. So they read everything from like the Three Stooges to like to random books about the apocalypse that I've found that are supposed to be kids' books. For those of you who don't know, the author of The Church Mice wrote a really weird post-apocalyptic book about called Henry's Quest, about finding gasoline outside somewhere. But it's that, like, how weird can I make my kids? That'll be the thing that keeps the hooks out of them, I hope. But I'm working on all of that, I swear.
So something that we've been asking our guests, if you had to kind of tie things up in a bow and provide a singular thing that you would want the average person to know, either about cybersecurity education or kind of your perspectives on the things that are happening, what would that headline be?
So I'm going to say this in two different ways, right? Because the way that I would say it and the way that it like resonates with me is just like, get off of stuff, right? Get off of Google, get off of TikTok, get off of Facebook, Get off of all the platforms. Get off of everything that you can. If you're worried about your kids, if that's where your head is at, and kids are your focus, right? Get them off of everything. Get them off of everything yesterday, because the extent to which that we don't know what it's going to be like to be a full generation of people who have grown up with this kind of monitoring, we have no idea what that's going to do to a generation, and we're not going to know for a long time. And you're better off not giving that data to people than you are giving that data to people. And worrying about, I mean, it's the biggest threat I think that there is out there, especially as state actors join the fray, especially as these become things that aren't just about companies, that aren't just about criminals, right? That are about states, nation states pushing each other around and building dominance, right? That stuff goes all the way down to your kids. That stuff goes all the way down to the things that you're showing them today. That goes all the way down to the culture that they consume and the people that they hang around. And that if we're not careful about that, that things can get bad fast. And I say this, and this is the biggest piece, for parents especially. If it's convenient, it's out to get you. And that's the hardest part of it all. If it's convenient, it's out to get you. And I hope, for those of you, if there is video on this, you can probably see the bags under my eyes. Man, it's tough being a parent out there right now, and you should be worried. But find your communities, find your people, right? And I'll just say this too, right? It's not a coincidence that it's so hard to find groups of kids that you feel that's letting your kids go out to play with, right? This is all part of kind of our historical moment right now. But find your people outside, hang out with people in real life, go get back out there and do those things in person again. Because I honestly think that a lot of the answers to our big security and safety problems are going to be found in real human people, in real companionship and community. And that the more that you have that, the more you have that offline and with people that you care about and trust, the safer you're going to be. And that everybody needs to have that and find that right now. So that's my big push above all.
That's awesome.
I feel like we could talk for another hour. There's a lot of questions we didn't
I would love
ask.
We'll have a part 2.
Yes, we will definitely have to have you on again, because there's things we did not even touch on. Like, how might AI be adding to this problem? But obviously that ties into everything else we've talked about.
We're just going to dangle it and take it away.
Yeah, cliffhanger for part 2.
Yes, so we will definitely have to have you back on. But
Fantastic.
I completely agree with you with the community issue. It seems like the more people that you can identify, the more that you can connect with people, the more meaningful relationships are. Yes, you can build a great network online, but if it doesn't have any kind of tie to your interpersonal reactions or interactions offline, what does it matter? Who are these people? And so that's an excellent point. And so that's part of why we like having a community like this, because we can get insights from people like you. So thank you for joining us, and thank you all for being with us. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please make sure you like us on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to us on whatever your podcatcher of choice is, and follow us and subscribe. Smash that like button, as they say.
As the kids are saying these days.
Sorry. I couldn't keep it together.
So we hope that you will be with us next time when we cross the firewall. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is crossing the firewall.